I say hello to Perth. That's just on the other side of the globe today. I say hello to Neesha Seth. She joined us from Perth, Australia. And the interesting story between Neesha and myself is we have a very important contact point, and that's just our very recognized James Hughes and Jay Hughes. And we met each other because I saw a picture of Neesha, and Neesha was sit down with Jay and have a cup of tea and have a good discussion. And probably I will have the same in some couple of days. It's planned in July this week. So welcome, Neesha. It's glad to have you today on the Global Wisdom Talk on the very important topic, mental health. But I've split it in I mean, mental health is just a great word, and it would be my pleasure if we can bring in front of our audience today just the interconnection between legacy, purpose, family, well-being, and mental health. So, before we jump in, it would be great if you can introduce yourself in brief to the audience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jean. And yes, that was a great way to be introduced through Jay, who's such an exceptional gentleman. We had a great time. We caught up in Aspen recently. So thank you, Jay, I guess. We should both be thanking him. So by way of quick introduction, hello, everybody. I'm Neesha Seth. Really excited to be here. My background, I'm an organisational psychologist, but I also do clinical work. I've also worked with a number of families over the years, and more recently, I have a clinical and organisational psychology practice, and I'm also started a proactive wellbeing business. So my business is called Legacy Psychology, so quite interesting that we're talking about legacy and purpose first, and these topics are all intertwined. Something I would probably like to add as well at the start for context is I myself come from quite a large family, which I shared with you before, Jean, and a very mixed family. And this is quite important because I think it's really shaped the way I think about some of these principles and my opinions as well. So my dad's one of 8 and he's Dutch Indian. My mum is one of 4 and she's Greek Albanian. So you can envisage kind of growing up in Singapore for 10 years and then traveling most of my family in Europe and the US. You get the opportunity to really meet people from different cultures, and the mind kind of widens before it narrows, which I think is really important. I'll talk about the mirror in as sort of the mirror out later on, but I authentically believe that for myself. So hopefully just that little bit of background will give you a little bit of context into why I'm answering some of your questions the way that I do.
That's great. So let's start. I'm very excited, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today. So what I have in mind, just Neesha, I guess you know is exactly as mine. Is just Jay brings in each discussion up a proverb or a quote from Aristotle. And this quote is describing there isn't just in flourished society without flourishing families. And by and large, from my perspective, the question arises in many families, but also on each individual. If you come up with the question, okay, can you tell me a little bit more about your legacy and your purpose and stuff like that? And in many cases, I've experienced this on myself, it's just you look in empty eyes, right? And so can you give us just your perspective? What is legacy? Potentially also on your own example in your family, what is purpose? And where's the correlation between both? And where is just also the connection to mental health?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, I've had the same experience when I do ask clients as well, what is legacy really, especially in the family context? And I think it's because legacy, there's, I guess, in my view, a misconception that legacy is really, you know, what we've left in the past, you know, what we do in the past. Whereas my view is that legacy is the impact we're actually creating right now. So legacy is in every moment. So it's the values that we live by, you know, it's the way we treat other people, and it's also the way we contribute to influence others, other people's lives. So, you know, legacy is more of, it's not a possession. Legacy is more a meaning, a sense of presence that you leave with somebody. So
Mm.
having said that, I think it's really important to be quite intentional and mindful that, legacy is not like a distant kind of future concept. It's being created right now, step by step. So in our daily, intentions, it's how we actually show up, whether we're present, whether we're really listening and deep listening, and the meaning we give to our lives. And that links into what is purpose, right? Because for me, my opinion on what is purpose, it's your internal compass. So I often, people laugh because I'm quite visceral and very touchy, but I really feel like it's your heart. So if I'm in purpose, my actions are really aligned with my values. But in order for that to take place, it's quite a journey. And I think it's an ongoing journey. I don't think I've known anyone who said, oh, I'm completely in purpose and that is it. In our lives, different things happen, different significant life events. So our purpose can navigate and change. I think it's about the work that we do on a sustainable basis to ensure that, hey, if I'm behaving in a certain way, if it's my dark side versus my light side, what is my intention? And if it comes back to your values, that mirror in, which I mentioned very early, I think people really feel that it's like a mirror out. But if we don't know why we're doing what we're doing, we're not attracting the right things. We're not able to connect with people in a way that's aligned with our values. So that's something I'm really passionate about as a psychologist, but just as a human being as well.
That's great. So what I want to give you, just you and the audience as well, is just my perspective on this term legacy and purpose and stuff like that. And it is what and a family member taught me this. A family member from he's just an inheritor, second generation. And we had a discussion back and forth about legacy and purpose and stuff like that. He comes also up with the question, how I find my purpose. I want to find my purpose. What is it actually? And in the end of the day, he comes up, he said to me, the right definition should be, and he said it to me, to him, is just how I can stay relevant, how I can stay significant, and what kind of impact. And he transformed a little bit. He told me impact is also a large word. He formed it in his description. He said impact is in his view and in his eyes how I can empower others. I found this fascinating, and it comes back to, also to what you said. It is just not in the future. It is also not in the past. It is just in the present, right? And that brings me just to my next question, and it would be interesting to hear what's your experience on what are the main barriers? What are the main hurdles? I mean, yes, it is easy to talk about purpose and legacy that should be this and this and this. And in the end of the day, you sit at home or in your office on your desk and say, okay, is it really that what I want? And if I want this, what could be my pathway into it?
So I guess, the barriers, and I'll take this from, I guess, a psychologist's lens, if you like, or a mental health lens. It's quite interesting because I don't think we can have legacy and purpose without good mental health. And there are so many barriers in relation to mental health. And you'll see my passion shine through this too, because I'm quite an advocate. But I guess, some of those barriers and this is probably well known, I'm preaching to the converted, I'm sure, with the audience, but the stigma and discrimination around mental health around the globe. I've spent a month in the US at a conference and we had great discussion around it's not just stigma at a societal or even within a family system, but internalized stigma, which is one of the most dangerous elements, because if we have a challenge and we don't know we have a challenge, or we know we do, but we don't feel like we can speak out, whether it's culturally inappropriate. I know some cultures do see mental illness as like a moral failing, as something of a weakness, which is really challenging. I know that from my background, I'm lucky my family's quite modern and open, but in some of those cultures I mentioned earlier, if you do have a mental health issue, it's not a done thing to go and see a psychologist. So, it's interesting, and the social stigma. But I think one of the things is the lack of access to care. So, around the world, it depends where you live. And it depends on your, your demographic. The cost of living in some of our cities now is high. we don't look after our mental health as well as we should. So, the step one is actually getting a baseline and trying to appreciate and understand, what does my life look like when I'm well? What does my life look like when I'm not so well? And trying to understand those signs and symptoms.
Right.
And if you're not understanding that, that is the challenge. The biggest obstacle I see with both my clinical and my organizational and family clients is we need a baseline to create legacy and purpose. If we're not feeling well, anything we create is not likely, in my professional view, to be sustainable, because at times it's going to get very dark. And when it's dark, we have clouded mind. We all know that. We've all had that brain fog, and that purpose is harder to get to. So I guess what I'm saying in summary to our audience, and in our conversation, Jean, is keeping proactive with your mental health and your well-being is the baseline for me. It's, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's at the bottom there. It's really the foundation.
That's true. And what comes in mind, and I will bring this clearly on the table, is I've wrote a term a couple of weeks ago, and the term is FOMO. Do you know?
Fear of missing out.
Yes, yes.
I quite like missing out sometimes, so I can sit on my couch and relax.
It is, and I put it just in two bottles. There's on the one hand, it's just these FOMO, and it is very real. I see this by my children, and in some cases, it's also on me, right? And on the other side, the second bottle is just the mental health. The question is just more, how do you deal with these fear of missing out, that you are constantly bombarded with options, what you can do, what you shouldn't do, and how do you navigate through all these stuff with a strong mental health? Is it just that you go more exercises, more yoga, stuff like that? In the end of the day, how do you deal as an individual, but also how do you deal as a whole concept of mental health in the entire family, right? Can you give me just in perspective and experience, how do you face this challenge, or with your clients? Probably they have the same.
Yeah, look, absolutely. So, like I said, the mirror in is the mirror out. On an individual level, we all have different capacities based on our lived experience. And so I guess there's not a one size fit all, but rather I think there's a scaffolding or a structure, if you like, that is really important to follow. And so what I often say to clients when they come in and we're talking about being overwhelmed, which then flows on to fear of missing out, is actually an anxiety. So we know that the key emotion that sits under anxiety is fear, right? So that's where that FOMO came from. And it's quite interesting because when you look at fear itself, fear is not, whilst it can seem quite scary, to put it in simple terms, fear is also quite exciting. So when I work with clients, we talk about why is there fear? Let's talk about that. Let's open that out. And so we unpack and understand. So the first step is, I would, and this is very practical but pragmatic, and I do it in the family system a lot, is let's draw a life wheel. Let's understand what makes you you. What facets of your life are you engaging in? So for most people, you've got family, your current branch, you've got your extended family, you've got hobbies, you've got work, you've got maybe volunteer work, whatever it might be. Right. And then what else? And then I get individuals, and I do this myself too, but actually grade, like on a bit of a wheel, how well am I going in these spaces? And if I have a fuel tank or a battery, I get to this drawing or coloring in, how much percentage am I up to? And then you challenge that. You take it, if you're not seeing a therapist or a counselor or a coach, take it to someone you care about. And you say to them, hey, is this an accurate reflection of how busy I am? Or am I actually how do I behave towards you? Am I irritable? What are my symptoms? And so you have to have a baseline, I feel. You need to know where you are in order to know where you're going. So the part of that then, the challenge to I guess challenge FOMO, is to be able to then say to yourself, do I want to do things well? Goes to legacy. How do I want to intentionally create space for people? What do I want them to say about me? Not that it's all about judgment, but it's more about what feeling do I want to leave? Right. So if you're in purpose, so I link that in now, you know, I'm already doing a lot. I either take something out, or the fear is no longer fear of missing out on that one thing. The fear is unraveling the 6 other things that you're just managing, right? and
Right.
and that's when people get to the other end. And I tell you, it is much, it's not impossible, but it's much harder to work back from there than to be proactive and actually be able to, be open and honest, and really pressure test or cognitively challenge is probably what we say in psychology, and reframe that FOMO into I can do that later versus I have to do it right now.
That's a great insight, and that's a great advice, I would say. So I will bring just in my perspective, these FOMO, these mental wealth, purpose, legacy comes in the end of the day in the overarching framework, what I call the well-being. Interestingly enough, if you come up with the term well-being, in some cases asked 10 individuals, and you will become, on one hand, nothing on responses, because nobody having clear idea what is well-being in the end of the day. Is it just to move on in a wellness center and get some massages or stuff like that? Or on the flip side of this, you will get more than 30 responses. Can I pick up your opinion? What is, in your perspective, well-being? Because what I recognize, especially, I call it the next generation of families, right? The Gen Zs and all this stuff. They are more familiar with these, but also they are struggle to come up. Okay, what is the clear definition if I want to that my family become just a well-being family, right? Can you give us just an idea or in your horizon or perspective on this?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So there's 2 ways I'm going to answer this question. They're both, bear with me because they both definitely intertwine. So the first is, I think from a well-being perspective, I've noted what you said there about the new generations, absolutely much more versed in the space of looking at holistic health. And by holistic health, I mean kind of integrated care. So, really in psychology, we talk about psychosomatic connection, and that has been the age old. It's not new, epigenetics, it's been around for ages, but how our mind and our body basically connect, and how most of trauma or significant life events actually sit in the body and not in the mind. So keeping this in tow of all the evidence, well-being and keeping proactive has moved into this space, I believe, where we've got cognitive, treatments, we've got somatic treatments, we've got emotional treatments, we've got more spiritual treatments. Basically, East meets West, and there is this great respect amongst, I've got so many colleagues across the different health professions, that we need to all work together in order for the best solution for a client or for yourself. When we're looking at the definition of well-being, maybe in a more so a family system, obviously our good friend Jay Hughes has his 5 capitals, which, we very much worked on with the hands. And I think that is one of the best definitions I've seen, and I use with my corporate clients too, is when we look at well-being, we proactively want to look at our psychological or our human capital, our spiritual capital, our social capital, our physical capital, and of course, financial capital, which is our thumb down here that just supports the other 4, not the other way around. And I think that is a really good definition, because it does encompass the psychosomatic, but what it also does is the spiritual and the social. And we know the social connectedness, act, belong, commit is a campaign we have in Australia. The connectedness is one of the key contributors to psychological well-being, and it fights loneliness, which is another epidemic kind of going on at the moment around the world. Yeah. And loneliness, as we know, is not about being alone. Loneliness, someone can have a family of 80 people and still feel alone. It's really about finding that alignment. So I think our conversation is so important today, talking about legacy and purpose, because mental health, these 3 as a triad, I think if we work together on these 3 in family systems, corporates, individually, it's just the key recipe to success. It really is.
What is your opinion on spiritual wealth? The interesting stuff. Give me just these one word on this.
Sure.
That is also what I often missing is, yes, we see these 5 capitals from J, or there are 6 capitals in some other cases and stuff like that. And most in each description, there is a very strong pillar that is spiritual wealth. Cultural-wise, we as European are just spiritual. I don't know what is it actually, right? Probably you in Australia say, yeah, we are more familiar, more open. Individuals in the US are also more open. What is your description on spiritual wealth? If it, just as an example, you should advise a family just on these 5 forms of capital, and there's one strong pillar, this is spiritual wealth. What is it?
Yeah, sure. So spiritual wealth for me, it would be the level of connection to something greater than oneself. That's probably the simplest way. And I think I appreciate, because as I mentioned, my dad's family are Dutch Indian. And so, you know, when you look at the richness of legacy in that family, we were in India last year with the whole family. And you have that real connection because it's like it's lineage. It passes through your blood nearly. And so it's not something science explains, but it's this connection, this sense of belonging. So I guess in some ways, as I talk it through, you could compare it to, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs again, all this time, but we all want a sense of belonging. But something I do say to clients, because we do need to respect, obviously the definitions will be different based on culture and different borders, is the essence of that capital, the essence of that wealth will be something greater than self. So it doesn't necessarily mean religion, because I've worked with some families and some clients who basically said to me, but I'm not religious and I don't want to be necessarily. What does this mean? And I said, well, flow. So Chetchmalovich, he's a psychologist, talks about flow. So I said, tell me about a time where you felt like you were nearly, I guess, out of your body and you were just in the moment and you lost track of time. You know, for me personally, it's when I'm having a conversation like this. You know, you can tell I get overexcited and talk a lot. Like I just feel, you know, like I've such a connection to you and what we're talking about as well. And that to me is spiritual wealth, because
Right.
you're actually sharing the connection. It's not about a transactional task. It's transformational. It's really sharing knowledge, isn't it? Sharing feeling as well.
Right. And I will share with the audience and also with you my own example. And
Great.
in my interpretation, spiritual wealth is, do I have access to my higher power? It correlates to your description. And if I have access and I won't have access to my higher power, that correlates directly to my mental wealth and mental health, right? Because in some cases you say, okay, is this important to me? No, it's, come on, right? And
Yes.
it is in some cases very hard, but it is just, if you have done this step and say, okay, what is my higher power? What I'm capable of actually in the end of the day? That is a very serious and interesting question, because it is also that you are serious with yourself, right? And that is just, you bring this flywheel into motion and over and over and over again. And it comes in the end of the day, also what you described. And that was just the term Jay approached me, the term of synchronicity, right? Is there some synchronicity between individuals? And you know exactly in 1 second, yes, there is synchronicity, or there isn't just anything else. And you say, okay, let's move away. It's just better, and it's fine in the end of the day. And through this term higher power, I will switch a little bit our discussion in the direction of the rising generation, right? I mean, we have a huge and great and broad discussion around the globe around about these 140 and 180 and stuff like that $1 trillion. And what does it mean in the end of the day? In my perspective, there's a direct correlation between mental health and these wealth transfer, because the whole world is talking only and only about the money. Nobody is talking about the recipients, right? Nobody is talking about how do you integrate that kind of gift or that kind of fortune, what you don't have to create by your own self. That was created by your parents or your grandparents and stuff like that. Is there, from your perspective, a greater damage on the horizon, what we can see in regards what this kind of wealth transfer will be produced in families? And what does it mean also for the whole ecosystem in the family in regards of mental health, in purpose, and all what we have discussed? That would be interesting to get your view.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jean. Look, I certainly think I agree with you. There definitely is a danger and there is a risk. My experience to date, one of the families I've worked with most recently, I have to say, has done a lot of work in this space in the rising generation. So I've had the really positive experience of having the opportunity to work with a couple of very senior family members who I think are very proactive. They've really looked forward and decided, okay, we need a rising generation program. And it's phenomenal. So and maybe if I share some of their approach, and you're more experienced, particularly Europe and the US. So I hear the danger maybe that maybe not a lot of families are doing this, but I feel like this family's maybe leading the way in some ways in this space. Is looking at so first and foremost the generation itself and understanding what is important for the generation, the rising gen. And within the rising gen, we separated the generations within that generation, if that makes sense. So we looked at the lower rising gen, the mid rising gen, and the higher rising gen. And different groups, cohorts had different requirements, So lower rising gen was between sort of birth and 8 years old. And we framed it in developmental years. So as a psychologist, I looked at the research as well. And then we had multiple advisors coming in from different areas of expertise. And part of that was to develop a program. And that program was tiered on 3 levels. So we look at individual level. So let's actually sit down and develop a personal roadmap where we're asking individuals to willingly, not force, but willingly engage in a personal development exercise, a bit of reflection, a bit of planning, softly, kind of bespoke, to the point where it might lead to professional development plans and getting involved in mentoring and the businesses, the vehicles, special purpose vehicles, whatever it might be. But then on top of that, at the team level, is actually having a rising generation board, because I think it's, we all, when we're young, I remember when I was young, it's hopefully not too far ago, but, the case was you wanted to be like your parents, you want that connection between the generations. So have authentic ownership, though, not here's a board and you don't make decisions, we make it for you, the older generation. It's a case of what's reasonable that can be decided and actually carried through, and having a proper board director assisting in structuring and governance, etc., so that they can learn over time. We know that's the best way to embed learning. And then at an organisation level, really having the family branches working together on specific projects where you see the layers. So this is the connectedness between branches and also between generations on special volunteer projects, which really you learn through actions, that old 70-20-10 rule in training. So I've seen it done so well, and it's not, it's a work in progress, but I think that takes a lot of work. And it also takes, probably my biggest challenge in that, to be completely open, coming in as sort of a mid-gen, I think it's actually that ownership and that control, which is coming from a protection space, I understand, at the senior levels, but at some point there needs to be a loosening sometimes of that for the rising gen, so they can actually make some mistakes within reason and can actually learn from them as well, because it's a totally different generation. So I think there needs to be a little bit more flexibility sometimes, and there the danger lies if there's not the flexibility to let people grow.
That's great. Would you follow my idea or my thought if I described, and I guess you are familiar also with this term, the family of affinity is an open system, is more stronger also on the mental health side as the original family, what we see in so many cases. Do you follow on this, or do you have any?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I follow, but I'll let you speak a little bit more about it because I'm enjoying hearing you speak about this.
Yeah. So because I'm I experience this on my family as well. I mean, there's a one hard decision to make to say, yes, we move away from these bloodline system family, right? We want to be an open system. We want to become just a family of affinity. And it is automatically the question rise up, okay, if we are an open system, what does it mean actually for our ground foundation? Or is it just on the other side, just better to structure our system with new individuals from the outside that can be an asset for our mental health as the entire family because they bring a new perspective, a fresh perspective, and stuff like that into the family, and that makes us stronger. But in the end of the day, we should define ourselves. Okay, how we evolve our mental health that comes up. What is in our description the mental health? What is our well-being, and how we can evolve this over generation, and what is necessary? I mean, I have two daughters. I mean, automatically the question raised up, okay, if I have a friend or a husband and he will join our family, what does it need? And what does it mean, right? So, and I'm a great believer, and that is also what I discuss with my families. What I serve on is to become a family of affinity, right? And because that is just, in the end of the day, a very strong system. And by and large, I mean, it is just. I've done a comparison between the books of Jim Collins' Good to Great and Great by Joyce in regards to Dennis Jeffries' book, Borrowed from the Grandchildren. I mean, there's so many parallels what you can use. And it comes in the end of the day into the conclusion that we don't make things so complicated for the families, right? So complicated to understand. It is also what I used in our discussion today in the Global Wisdom Talk to make it easier to understand. That in some cases the light pops up and say, yeah, that is what I want, right? That is what I'm looking for, and it helps me. It supports me. It makes us our family stronger, and that is just what also my purpose is, and it's much appreciated to have this discussion with you. And I will come to the end, and it's so. First of all, it's much appreciated. I enjoyed it very much today, and it would be my wish that we can continue this kind of discussion. So I have two questions as a final question. The one question is coming back a little bit to the raising gen and to the new generation of families. What do you see actually? What will you see over the next decade, 50 years, on family systems, family structures? I mean, from my perspective, these traditional family, what we see today and in the past, the family of tomorrow will have nothing to do with these families, what we see today and what we have seen in the past. What is your perspective on this, and what does it mean actually for the system as a family?
Sure. So, look, I think looking into the future, and I'll address this sort of at an independent individual level, team, and an organizational level. You can't half tell I'm an org psych, can you? So, look, I think on an individual level, you're going to see. I agree with you. I just want to say first, I agree about having an open family system. I don't think there can be another way in the future in that sense, because if we truly want a sense of belonging and a sustainable family system, and the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves proverb, we really want to make sure that there's responsible use of wealth and transfer of ownership. I think it's immensely important that individuals are allowed to be themselves and respected for that. And the challenge that we see for maybe individuals coming into family systems, I don't like the use of the word, but it's been used in marrieds. That sense is, you have your own sort of family branch, but if a partner does not feel connected to the system, it's very difficult to get that system to grow. And, it's like any family or any business and team, everyone has to feel connected. There's science behind that. So it's about how you do that and how you transition that. And so I think as the generations transition upward, this will become easier to happen just because of the way the openness of the generations coming up from my experience. So I think there's a level of individuality that can exist within that system, which is important. So particularly for Rising Gen, to have the opportunity to work as part of the system, but also first and foremost, to be encouraged to work outside the system in order to gain that, in a sense, from a business, credibility and respect, and that foundation of how do I navigate in a world with lots of different diverse individuals and different businesses, and have that chance to choose what they want to do, not just the family business. I think that's really important. The second part of that is the roadmap, sort of the personal roadmap, is really important to help from as young as 8 years old, to start to really navigate where am I going, and what does that look like, and that can change, but get that healthy narrative in. So I think family systems that have that in place, not just for the Rising Gen, but for the future generations, and family systems are well set to respond to what is an ever-changing world, as we know. Especially with the changing business climate, there may be changes to the business. So we want increased education in our rising generations. So, the new form of, having executive MBAs, working towards having, in Australia, having agricultural or mining degrees is quite important. In Europe, I imagine industries will be different as well, depending on the industry that the family is in, but making sure that the technical and the behavioural skill set is covered. From an intergenerational, what I think will change and what the challenges will be is as the generations move up, it's making sure that there's what's the word? It's like having a knowledge capital that stays in there. So we can only learn so much, obviously, from books and from little conversations, but we want to keep our older generations engaged and respected for as long as possible as mentors, so that we can really grow and learn from experience, and everyone feels useful in that system. The whole elders, I think, approach is really important as well. And then finally, I would like to see, and this is partly through your inspiration, Jean, from previous conversation we had in preparation for this call, but I think families from around the world really connecting on some of these challenges, because, no challenge is completely unique. And what I absolutely love is the intercultural connection. It is so beautiful. I think through diversity really breeds beauty. And I really feel that if all of these connections and the Rising Gen get together, this is where the excitement is. This is how we solve systemic challenges around the world, is bringing young people together. You see it done all over the world with the UN Young Professionals, other groups I've been involved in. When we all get together around the world, it's amazing. There's an energy. And so I'd love to see that with the family systems. I think the Rising Gen would be very excited about that.
That's very much appreciated. And my final question for today, Neesha, is if you and I have the opportunity to meet us in 500 years from now, potentially you look fresher as me.
We both won't look amazing.
So if we can meet us in 500 years from now, what is your perspective if you look backward on the societies, on families, on a broader perspective? What is your view? Potentially, it could be very hard, but give me just your idea.
So apologies, you're saying if I look back 500 years, what would I see now?
Yes.
Gosh, 500 years. Yes, this is very exciting. I think I've gone as far as 100 years, but not 500 in my mind. Well, what I hope I would see is I hope I would see us all really getting on, losing our fear and getting our courage to understand artificial intelligence, AI, because I really think that is a rocket. It's being spoken about everywhere. 75% of the psychology conferences I've been to have had AI everywhere, and there's a lot of fear. And I think that is going to help drive us. When I look back, another thing that I think I will see is I would hope that over that span of 500 years, and by then we might be robots too, so it might be a very different perspective. But I think we would see that mental health is something that is just a beautiful equal word, not a word that is related to challenge, right? Because I'm obviously very biased being a psychologist, but I think if we can just get on board around creating a safe space for mental health. And then if I look at the spiritual side, I really do feel that with all of the work in that neurolinguistics and the biohacking space, you know, you and I may very well be around in 500 years looking even better than we do now in spacesuits. So, not that aesthetics is the most important thing, but I do believe longevity and the decisions and choices that human beings will make, hopefully, will be much better. So, in retrospect, I'd be looking and going, oh, we're way better now, but we're starting to get better. That's what I hope to see in the future.
A great perspective. And so it was a great pleasure, Neesha. Many, many thanks. And I'm looking forward to continue our discussion. For today, best greetings to Perth.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean.